U.S. sugar tariffs designed to shield American farmers instead pushed the entire soft drink industry onto high fructose corn syrup and drove candy plants overseas. This is Unintended Consequences, Episode 92. In 1984, Coca-Cola and Pepsi both announced they would replace sugar with high fructose corn syrup in their flagship colas. The decision looked like a simple cost-saving move, yet it followed directly from two federal policies that had been operating for decades in opposite directions. One kept the price of cane and beet sugar roughly twice the world level. The other made corn so abundant that its sweetener byproduct became the cheaper alternative. The sugar program began with the Jones-Costigan Sugar Act of 1934. Lawmakers renewed and revised it through successive farm bills. They wanted to stabilize incomes for roughly 10,000 domestic cane and beet growers. Many of those growers ran family operations in Florida, Louisiana, Hawaii, and the upper Midwest. World sugar prices swung sharply with Cuban harvests and later with Soviet bloc purchases. Those swings threatened sudden collapses that had already bankrupted mills in the 1920s. Import quotas and tariffs therefore seemed a straightforward way to give growers predictable returns without direct cash payments. The policy enjoyed bipartisan support because it protected both rural employment and the strategic goal of domestic sweetener capacity. Supporters reasoned that without a floor under prices, the same volatility that had emptied rural towns once could do so again. A modest border measure would avoid the visibility and recurring appropriations fights of outright subsidies. After the 1974 lapse of earlier quotas, Congress reinstated strict import limits in the 1977 Food and Agriculture Act. Lawmakers tightened those limits further in 1981 and 1985. The mechanism set a domestic price target around 21 cents per pound in the early 1980s. It did so by restricting raw sugar imports to roughly 1.2 million short tons annually, while imposing tariffs on any additional volume. At the same time, separate corn programs under the same farm bills offered price supports and deficiency payments that encouraged record plantings. By 1980, corn acreage had expanded enough that wet milling capacity for HFCS grew from 1.5 billion pounds in 1975 to more than 8 billion pounds by 1985. Industry analysts at the time noted that the two policies together created a 10 to 15 cent per pound gap between sugar and HFCS. Proponents pointed to stable farm incomes as proof the system worked. Skeptics inside the sweetener-using industries warned that the gap would eventually tempt large buyers to reformulate rather than keep paying the protected price. Those objections remained secondary to the Farm Bill Coalition's focus on grower balance sheets. Soft drink companies faced annual sweetener bills in the hundreds of millions. They tested HFCS 55 in the late 1970s and found it performed identically in colas once formulation adjustments were made. When Coke and Pepsi switched in 1984, the remaining bottlers followed within 2 years. That move removed roughly 1 million tons of sugar demand from the market almost overnight. Candy and confectionery manufacturers could not use HFCS in many recipes because of texture and browning differences. They instead relocated plants to Canada, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic, where world price sugar remained available. Between 1985 and 1995, U.S. sugar-using food employment fell by an estimated 70 to 10,000 jobs, while HFCS production capacity doubled again. The causal chain ran through relative prices. The sugar wall raised one input cost. Corn subsidies lowered the substitute. Manufacturers optimized around the cheaper option. A secondary effect appeared in the 1990s when the same price gap encouraged Mexican and Canadian firms to export sugar-containing products back into the United States. That flow prompted new quota fights at the border. Beverage makers could not simply absorb the higher sugar cost. Candy makers could not easily petition for an exemption. The arithmetic showed that even a 10-cent gap on millions of pounds per year exceeded typical profit margins in high-volume, low-margin categories. The capital cost of moving a confectionery line was lower than the cumulative premium paid year after year. The policies therefore did not merely raise one price. They altered the relative economics of two entire processing industries. The sugar program survived every subsequent farm bill. Quota volumes were adjusted modestly under NAFTA and WTO rulings. HFCS consumption peaked around 2008 and has since declined modestly as some beverage makers returned to sugar blends or stevia. Yet the structural price differential remains. Several large candy firms that moved south have kept those facilities open even after partial liberalization. That persistence shows how capital investments made under one policy regime last. Current estimates from the Department of Agriculture still place the cost to U.S. sweetener users at roughly $2 to $3 billion annually. Most of that cost passes to consumers through higher prices for sugar-restricted products. Attempts to unwind the quotas have repeatedly stalled. The original growers remain a concentrated, organized constituency, while the downstream costs are diffused across millions of consumers and thousands of smaller manufacturers. When two separate support programs operate on close substitutes, the relative price signal they create can redirect an entire supply chain within a few years. Decision makers therefore need to model not only the protected sector, but also the adjacent inputs that remain unregulated. The sugar HFCS episode also shows that once manufacturing processes and plant locations adapt to the distorted prices, reversing the original policy becomes far more difficult than enacting it. What current agricultural or industrial supports might be quietly reshaping neighboring industries in ways their authors did not intend? That's unintended consequences for today. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend who'd appreciate the story. Subscribe wherever you listen, and we'll be back tomorrow with another case. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at NARA Network. Links in the show notes. One more thing. If you liked today's episode, our sister show, Models and Agents, is worth a spot in your feed, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. It's one of the NARA Network's daily briefings, all free at naranetwork.com. The Do Positive Pod is the club for people who do something about it. Episodes and the dispatch wall at naranetwork.com, the DPPODD. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.